Hello, Star Trek fans, and welcome to the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast. My name is Kim.
And my name is James.
And we're watching Star Trek Deep Space Nine from the beginning, one episode at a time. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are on Season 5, Episode 8, Things Past. This episode aired November 18th, 1996. Before we talk about this one, anything to say about last week's podcast, which was an embarrassingly awful episode of Star Trek, but a fantastic podcast?
No, the podcast was perfect.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Although, apparently my notes for this episode call it Things Pasty.
Yeah. Well, should we talk about this one?
Oh, I think so.
All right. In the cold open, Dax, Sisko, Odo, and Garak are returning from a Bajoran conference about the occupation. Garak is complaining that he expected to get a warmer welcome at the conference. He thought the Bajorans would want to hear someone provide them with an opposing philosophical view. He thought the conference was supposed to be an historical examination of the occupation, so he expected more debate and discussion.
From a people who've just endured 50 years of brutal occupation. I don't think that was really what you should expect there. Somebody should have warned Garak about this.
Well, it's ridiculous because it just happened. The wounds are fresh. Every person alive remembers it.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe in 100 years you could have a philosophical discussion, but that's not going to happen today, a couple years later.
Oh, exactly.
Well, Garak complains that the Bajorans went out of their way to dismiss everything he had to say, even giving him a name tag that said Elim Garak, former Cardassian oppressor.
That was great.
It's amazing.
I loved how Dax just doesn't take any of his crap, and she says, would you prefer former spy?
Well, Sisko argues that the Bajorans seemed pretty polite considering the situation, but Garak laments all they are interested in is promoting the myths and legends of the glorious resistance.
Oh, funny.
In the closed captions of this moment, it had glorious resistance in double quotes.
Oh, so they even got his intonation in there. That's actually quite good.
Yeah. Well, then Dax changes the topic to Odo, who is sitting silently in the background in deep thought. Apparently, Odo has quite a Bajoran fan base, but Odo quickly says he has nothing to be proud of. Sisko disagrees, calling him constable in this moment because we still haven't learned our lesson.
Yeah.
He says keeping order during the occupation would be a tough job for anyone, but Odo managed to earn the trust of both sides while doing it. Dax says the moderator said, Odo may have worked for the Cardassians, but his only master was justice. Sisko chimes in with, and a legend is born. Odo does not look too thrilled, as usual.
He really doesn't like this scrutiny that he's receiving because of this. And I don't think Sisko really helps the situation by describing it as a legend is born.
Yeah.
That's not something Odo really craves.
No, but he's very proud of himself normally.
Yeah.
And looks at what he does as important, and he thinks he's very skilled at being a detective and being the security on the station.
Oh, yeah, right.
But he doesn't like it when anybody else looks at him and makes any comments about it, yeah.
I want to be quietly competent.
Right. Well, now we jump to the station, and the Bajoran officer tells Worf that Sisko's runabout is approaching, but there's something wrong. They're not responding, and sensors show unusual EM signatures along their hull. The runabout is on autopilot, but there are 4 very weak life signs on board. Worf calls for an emergency medical team and says to get the shuttle within transporter range. We beam over to the runabout and find everyone is sitting in their chairs, but they're unconscious. Dr. Bashir scans Sisko and says there's an excess of neural energy in his cerebral cortex, but he doesn't know what's happening, so he doesn't know if he can revive them.
Worf shouts, woohoo, I'm now in charge.
Oh, yeah, but his girlfriend is amongst this crew.
And surrenders the station to the Klingon Empire for its greater glory.
Wow, dark.
That's how he could get back in the good graces of Gowron, just saying. Just throwing out a few ideas there for him.
That's true. Well, in the next scene, Sisko wakes up, but he's in different clothes, and he's sitting on the floor next to Odo in a very dark Terok Nor. This is not the DS9 we're used to. There's lots of miserable people milling about and armed Cardassians on the second level. That's how you know it's Terok Nor. Nobody has to tell you. And from here, we cue the theme song.
Awesome. We're back on Terok Nor.
What an amazing start to an episode. This is maybe the best start to any episode we've ever had.
Oh.
I don't know. I really enjoyed that scene with Garak talking about how he can't believe they weren't there to listen to his side of the story. I thought that was really good. And then how they both appeared unconscious on the runabout, but then in a different Terok Nor.
Yes.
I don't know. This was a great beginning.
It was one of those very compact openings that manages to squeeze in just a lot within a very short period of time.
Yep.
And Andrew Robinson's portrayal of Garak just seems like such a real person. And Dax, basically having to tell him off or trying to get him to see reality.
Yeah. He's got some interesting lines in this episode that we will discuss as we go.
So, I think we have to kick off over-analysis immediately here.
Oh, 5 minutes in.
Yeah. I think we should just jump straight in. First thing, we're either seeing one of two things here, and I want your take on it. We're either seeing the complete emotional brokenness. Is that a word?
Brokenness
of Garak. Maybe through his training or through his career, that he literally cannot relate to what went on during the occupation and how the people who lived through it, what they're going through. Or this is because Garak is an absolute true believer that the occupation was good for the Bajorans, it was required and a noble thing for his people to do. So that the Cardassians did nothing wrong because they were helping the Bajorans ultimately.
Well, he has that mistaken thought that the Cardassians are superior beings to the Bajorans. And he mentions that, says a few things that show that that's what he thinks during this episode. So if you continue to think that way, why would you ever think that it was wrong what they did? He hasn't grown in the right ways. He's grown in some ways, but he's still seeing the Cardassians as superior creatures.
The other thought I had here was, could Garak be trolling the Bajorans? We know he has that really evil sense of humor. Could it be he's just enjoying himself being the contrarian?
Well, I think, again, the things that he says later in this episode betray his real feelings. Also, I think he's a survivor.
Yeah.
And you don't survive by stepping into the middle of a bunch of Bajorans and then trolling them. So I really don't think so.
Yeah. The things he says later in the episode, I think, betray his true feelings.
Yeah. Or at least reveal them.
Yes. I do think his badge, though, should have Simple Tailor on it.
Yeah, that is what it should have said, a Simple Tailor. Well, now a Bajoran grabs Sisko and tells him to show some dignity. He wakes up Dax and Garak and yells at Odo to get up off the floor. He says no wonder the Cardassians think we're animals. He tells them to stop doing drugs.
Don't do drugs, kids.
And he says, we don't need another cleansing today. They pull Odo to his feet and try to get out of the crowd while very dramatic music plays.
Yeah.
Back on the normal DS9, Bashir has an image of a brain on the screen that is spinning around, and I swear to God, it looks like E.T. Did you see that?
No, I did not.
It's the color of E.T. Yeah. It's the exact shape of E.T. It was E.T.
So basically they had like a rotating E.T. that they figured, it's close enough to a brain, put that on screen.
Looks like a brain. It's fine.
This is standard def. Nobody will see it.
Oh, man. Well, he's got everyone on a bed with the beds in a circle and everyone's head sort of pointed toward the middle. And he also has a sort of football helmet over everyone's head. It reminds me of what they put over you when you get an MRI and they strap you down. Anyway, I don't like it. That's what it reminds me of.
Hope nobody's claustrophobic.
He says there's lots of brain activity, but they aren't responding to any stimuli. Worf comes in to say they found that the runabout encountered a Class 2 plasma storm, so Bashir asks the computer about this situation and Class 2 plasma storms, but the computer reports there's no connection.
Yeah.
Worf says they're going to continue to analyze the runabout, and Bashir has some research to do.
Yeah, he can't find a reason for why a common phenomena has had an uncommon effect on our people.
Exactly. Back on Terok Nor, we found a quiet corner to chat. Dax wonders if they time traveled, but Garak points out their clothes have changed, so that doesn't make sense. Odo wonders if they could be in a holosuite, but that doesn't seem right either. And then they wonder why they aren't attracting any attention from anybody else on the station. It seems like nobody recognizes them for who they are, and everyone just thinks that they're Bajorans. Dax wonders if there was some kind of cross-dimensional transfer where their minds were transferred across time and space and into the bodies of Bajorans. I love that explanation.
Dax is just the ideas person in this episode.
She really is. And of course, is the only one who gets anything accomplished also. But Garak doesn't think that makes sense because they still see each other as their normal selves. When they look at each other, they're not seeing Bajorans.
Yeah.
I figure the reason that's true is because you don't want to change out all the actors. I mean, you paid these people, so you want them to be on your show.
Right, exactly.
And so do the people watching it.
Although that would make for an interesting episode if you brought in different actors to play them as Bajorans.
Yeah, because they already had the people who they looked like. They had those people on set.
Yeah.
They could have looked in the mirror or something and saw themselves as Bajorans, but when they're looking at each other, they see their normal selves. Just a little camera trick they could have done.
There was an episode of The Prisoner from, a long time ago, where Patrick McGoohan was filming, I think it was Ice Station Zebra, and the whole episode revolves around him being in a different person's body. So they had a different actor play the whole episode.
Handy. Well, on soap operas, they recast people, they don't care.
What was your line? Interchangeable blonde.
Yeah. Well, they remember a plasma anomaly on the sensors in the runabout, but nothing after that. Odo just wants to get off this station. He seems particularly uneasy.
Yes.
Garak suggests that they go directly to the authorities and explain the situation. He says he has security codes that will prove he's a Cardassian. And Odo says the authorities on Terok Nor will not be looking for reasons to help. They'll be looking for reasons to interrogate. But here's a good example of where he's like, well, the Cardassians are completely reasonable. We just should go and talk to them and everything will be fine.
Yeah.
It's like if he even for 1 second thought about it from the other perspective, which was how would he feel if a Bajoran came up to him and said, by the way, I'm a Cardassian.
I have secret Cardassian access codes.
Yeah, they just kill him or try to figure out where did you steal those?
Yes, exactly.
Well, just then, Dax points out Gul Dukat on the second level, and they decide to keep moving. As they move away, Odo looks up at the two dudes standing with Dukat, and he seems very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
He turns and bumps into a guy that looks like a zombie. He's pale, and he has a phaser injury in his chest. Odo gasps, but when he turns away, the guy disappears.
Yeah.
And it seems like nobody else saw him but Odo. We learn that one of the men talking to Dukat was Odo's predecessor on the station, a guy named Thrax. Dax says that means we've gone back at least 9 years in time. And then 2 Cardassian soldiers grab Dax and say she's going to come with them. Garak tries to bribe one of the Cardassians, but he just gets punched in the face.
Yeah, it doesn't go very well for him.
Yeah, and the guy who punched him says Dax has been selected, and away they go. Garak is completely stunned by this punch to the face.
Yeah.
I was wondering if this experience was going to help him see that his people aren't always the heroes of every story.
Not really.
But I'm not sure.
He's a little bit too heavily invested, I'm afraid.
I'm afraid so. Well, we jump back to DS9, and now there's blood running from Garak's nose as he lies in the infirmary unconscious. After a dramatic ad break, Bashir says some capillaries burst in Garak's nose. He says the bleeding might be a psychosomatic response to something that's going on. They let us know here that there are stakes in the world that we're living in.
Yes.
Because if they're injured in this other world in their brains, then they're going to be injured in real life. So that was sort of the whole point of this scene.
Yeah, because Julian says potentially they could stop their heart or burst a blood vessel because of blood pressure. He gives some great reasons of how whatever's happening to them could actually kill them.
Just letting us know to be worried.
Yeah, it was a nice little transition scene.
Yeah.
They're doing a nice job of explaining it without a lot of hand waving.
Maybe they learned from Move Along Home. That was the one flaw in that story. Just tell us some stakes.
Right.
Well, Worf asks again what the cause of all of this is, and Bashir still has no clue. Back on Terok Nor, Sisko is really annoyed that they took Dax, and he wants to know what she has been selected means. And then Garak reveals that he stole a device from the guy who punched him, a comp-link, which he can use to find their identities. Odo says he'll add pickpocket to Garak's resume, and Garak totally dismisses this comment by saying, it's only a hobby.
Yes.
I laughed out loud at that. That was very funny and delivered beautifully.
Well, and Odo says, it's interesting that a simple tailor has a high-level security code.
Well, yes, that is interesting.
I will totally give Garak one thing. He remains committed to his lies, even when the evidence unquestionably proves he's not a simple tailor. And they all know it.
Yeah.
And they've witnessed it.
Yeah. He's committed to the bit.
Exactly.
So Garak figures out that Sisko is a Bajoran electronics engineer named Ishan Che. When he says that, he really gets Odo's attention.
Yeah.
And Garak is an artist who's been arrested 3 times for disturbing the peace. He says, I must be incorrigible. Again, very funny. And his name is Jalur Guetta. Then he scans Odo, but before he says anything, Odo says, I'm a bookkeeper, 46 years old. I have a wife, 2 sons, and my name is Timor Landy. Sisko is like, how do you know that? But before he can answer, Quark interrupts them. He's looking for workers, 12-hour shift, 2 5-minute breaks for 1 strip of platinum.
Thus proving how Quark, during the occupation, was all heart.
Right. Well, they follow Quark as he makes some sarcastic remarks.
Yeah.
And Odo wonders how much damage it would cause to the timeline if Quark were to suffer a mysterious accident.
And Sisko never does get his answer.
No.
Odo is so obviously hiding something.
Yeah, he's a little over the top hiding it.
Right.
Well, so now Dax gets dragged into Dukat's office, I think, is where they are. It's so dark on the station, I can never tell where we are.
Cardassians never paid the electric bill.
I guess. He makes Dax do like a twirl around and says, she'll do, dismissing the officer who brought her in. I mean, it's already so gross and frightening.
Yeah, he's 9.5 out of 10 creepy here.
Oh my God.
Bordering on a full Olympic 10 for creepy.
Ugh. He tells her to pour them some Kanar and then notices that she's shaking and terrified because she should be terrified in this situation. He says that he's a fair man and she has nothing to fear from him. He doesn't intend to abuse her. He's just lonely and he wants someone to talk to. He says he needs a friend. And then he says it's ironic that he chooses a simple Bajoran girl to share his innermost thoughts with. I mean, this is absolutely grotesque.
So
the implications of what this is are bad enough. But then this nonsense about, I choose a simple Bajoran girl to share my innermost thoughts with. It's absolutely horrifying.
Well, this is building on something you've certainly been noticing, that there is something really off about Dukat and how he's obsessed with Kira.
Yeah.
He's basically a sexual predator in a position of power. And I think this is almost like a definition of grooming.
So gross.
I think they're expanding on something that's been hinted and actually showing you here. This is what Dukat is like.
Yeah, and he's so busy congratulating himself about how nice he is to everyone. And I mean, that this is such a good thing that he's doing for her. It's just awful.
He just needs a friend. If their intention was to show sort of the degeneracy of this character, it's clearly working.
That's true. Now in Quark's, Garak and Sisko are cleaning up a big mess, and Garak says he remembers the occupation being tidier, and Sisko's like, everything is tidier when someone else is doing the cleaning.
Yes, he does not seem to be quite aware of how messy things were.
No. Garak says Bajorans are more suited to this sort of work. Servile work is in their nature. And Sisko says he'll be sure to mention that to Major Kira when they get home.
Wow.
There are exceptions to every rule, Garak says.
You're seeing front and center here just that Cardassian racism.
Yes.
And even when he's basically being forced to confront the realities of the occupation, Garak is still very comfortable in his Cardassian mindset.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're made for servile work. And when Sisko contradicts him, there's an immediate, instant excuse for that. It's a sort of yes, but kind of response.
Well, you really have to tell yourself a story in order to not think that your people are the villains in this story.
Oh, right.
And the Cardassians have convinced themselves that this is what the Bajorans needed. They were better off with them there.
Yeah.
Like he says here, they're meant to be servants. They're not meant to be rulers.
Yeah.
They have to tell themselves that story in order to justify what they've done just in their own minds.
And Garak, as a true believer, is not going to have any problem with that.
Absolutely. He's totally bought into this, just like he's bought into every other piece of Cardassian garbage that we've seen in the past.
Yeah.
This was really quite revealing.
I think so.
Many times we have discussed, boy, wouldn't Garak see things differently now after being on the station and having been sort of rejected by his own people? No, is the answer. He continues to look to it as this paragon. But come on, man. Now you're on the crappy part of it. Of course, at the end, he's probably going to be like, well, that wasn't real.
Yeah, I would agree.
Well, then Odo catches a glimpse of the 3 Bajorans that they're inhabiting, walking by on the promenade, each with a phaser blast wound to the chest. He's having a bit of a panic attack, but he pretends to be okay, saying the smell is making him sick.
Yeah.
Sisko asks him again how he knew his name before Garak told it to him. And Odo says he recognized the other 2 names from the security files kept during the occupation. It was the name of 3 Bajorans who were publicly executed for plotting to kill Dukat. He says they were innocent, but Dukat wanted to make an example of them. So they figure they better find a way out of here before that happens. And now Red from That 70s Show comes in. This is Thrax, the former head of security on the station. I have to say, Red makes a very peculiar looking Cardassian.
He does.
I don't know if it's like the size of his head or maybe the shape of his head or the length of his neck. I don't know. Where when you look at Dukat, it's almost like he's the perfect Cardassian. He's got the exact perfect proportions everywhere, and he fits into that uniform.
Yep.
But Red is just, he's off. This does not work in the same way.
Yes, I would agree. This must have been before Thrax escaped Cardassia and started the time travel experiment, which led to Year of Hell.
I assume this is the beginning of it. He went right from here to the Delta Quadrant.
Yes. He has played, 4 characters in Star Trek to date. By this point, he'd just played 2. This was his second.
Oh, yeah, because he was in Lower Decks as well, right?
Yep.
What else was he in?
He was in The Undiscovered Country, where he played the president.
Yeah, I always forget that one.
And probably one of the top 10 Voyager episodes, the 2-parter, Year of Hell.
Yep.
Really good in that episode.
Oh, yeah. Well, he's come to question Quark about his association with a known smuggler. Quark plays it coy until Red mentions the Obsidian Order is looking into the smuggler's associates, and then Quark spills what he knows, of course.
Yeah.
Garak looks up this smuggler's name on his little stolen device and finds that he was a Romulan spy who worked in this sector 7 years ago. So the timing isn't making sense anymore.
Right.
Because Odo should have been the security chief at that time, not Thrax. Odo brushes it off, saying it's all weird and we should be trying to figure out how to get off the station. Sisko agrees and says he thinks they should try contacting the Bajoran resistance. Kira told him about a prearranged signal the resistance used on Terok Nor to set up a meeting. So he says he'll initiate the signal after their shift at Quark's.
This scene is also important because you see that Quark was doing exactly the same thing as he was today.
Yeah, he was exactly the same.
Yeah, just still dealing with smugglers and having the law on his tail all the time.
Yeah. Well, later, the 3 guys are heading to dinner when they pass, I don't know what it was. It was like a little pop-up shop or something. And Sisko flips over a vase. And then they go sit down and grab some lunch. And Garak criticizes the Bajorans' lack of style for their secret signal of just flipping over a vase. But Sisko's like, well, they did it for years right under Cardassian noses. And Garak points out it didn't happen under his nose. It happened under Dukat's nose. So it's like anything bad about the Cardassians here is just laying at the feet of Dukat.
Yeah, well, he says of Dukat, just another swaggering, self-important gull with too much vanity and not enough ability. He is very much in contempt of Dukat.
And this is when Dukat comes walking in, and Sisko's like, well, maybe you're right, but he's no fool because he's surrounded by all these armed guards.
So this makes me wonder, is Garak laying all the failings of the Cardassians, because he must be at least aware that things aren't going terribly well, at the feet of gulls who are incompetent? There's just these bad ones out there that are not doing a good job. But overall, we're still really good and superior. But the reality is, the majority of these gulls, all of them, if you like, are incompetent blowhards with too much vanity and not enough ability. But Garak just convinced himself, oh, it's just a bad few. But the system promotes and produces these idiots. Garak is unwilling to even concede that or deal with the reality.
Well, I think what we've seen in the past is that this is the Obsidian Order looking down on the military.
Oh.
So yes, I think he thinks this, and what was his dad's name? Inabrantane?
We haven't confirmed any of that.
I think that he said the same thing, or there was always this sort of these negative comments being made about the military and the gulls. And there was that episode where Sisko had to work with Dukat when they were trying to find the Defiant. Yeah. Remember that stupid episode with Riker? There was a clear line of distrust between the Obsidian Order and the military. Right. So they were not going to trust each other, not going to think the other one was better. Obviously, they're going to think their thing is superior to the other thing. So of course the Obsidian Order is going to blame the military. Yeah. And of course the military is going to blame the Obsidian Order.
So you think it's more of, it isn't necessarily that they're all incompetent. It's just the Obsidian Order believes they're incompetent because the Obsidian Order are the clever ones.
Well, I think this type of attitude does breed incompetence. So,
yeah,
it's not that they're not incompetent, but yeah, you see my point, right?
Yeah. Oh, completely. Yeah, I looked at it very much as the Cardassian system would produce these blowhards who were more talk than actually ability.
Yes. Well, then when Odo goes to eat his soup, he sees blood all over his own hands, but he covers again when Sisko asks him what's going on.
Yeah.
Something very bad going on with this guy.
I know. I feel bad for Odo. By this point, hasn't he learned that maybe sharing stuff with someone like Sisko would actually be beneficial?
I would think so, but gosh, I guess not. Well, then the guy who shouted at them at the beginning of the episode for being on drugs joins them at the table and asks what they want, so he's apparently speaking for the Resistance. Sisko tells him they want off the station. He says they're involved with the Federation. The guy isn't really believing the story, but in this conversation, he does call Cardassians spoonheads, which outrages Garak.
Yeah.
But Sisko has to shush him. And just then there's an explosion, and the Bajoran guy runs off while everyone is shouting and running around in a panic. Sisko shouts, "Dax!" and he rushes over towards her, with Odo chasing after him, trying to stop him.
Yeah.
But it's too late. Cardassian guards grab Sisko, Odo, and Garak and throw them in cells, along with a bunch of other people. So after an ad break, we show everybody locked up in the holding cells, and Garak is complaining that they're just thrown in the cells with a bunch of other ruffians because, clearly they're more important prisoners since they tried to kill Dukat. I mean, this guy is so full of himself.
Yeah, he's more upset about being held with common criminals than the fact that what's going to happen to them. I loved how Sisko responds with, "Maybe they'll salute when they execute us."
Oh my gosh.
Garak is sometimes very divorced from reality.
Right? In comes Cardassian Red, and he starts rattling off the sentences for the Bajorans in the cells. And when he gets to our crew, he says they attempted to kill Dukat, but Sisko argues that they had no opportunity to do that because they were sitting at a table when it happened. Red says no witnesses came forward, and Odo is like, why would any witnesses risk their lives for 3 strangers? And then Odo tells Red to go look for the witnesses, and he tries to refute everything that Red lists as evidence against them.
Yes.
But Red really doesn't care, isn't listening.
Including the Cardassian soldiers having said that, they found them trying to strangle Dukat.
Yeah, which never happened, and he doesn't go and interrogate anybody. He just believes it. He says there's sufficient evidence for a conviction. Odo tells him to conduct a real investigation, but Red's like, nah, you'll get your sentence later. He's done everything he's willing to do.
Cardassian justice doesn't make mistakes, so why would he want to actually conduct an investigation?
Right. Now, Dukat and Dax are, I guess, recovering from the attack. That was the 4th assassination attempt that Dukat has survived. Dax suggests that maybe he should find another job, which makes him laugh. Well, anyway, she's stuffing her face because she says she doesn't often get to eat like this, which I wasn't sure how she would know that. But because she's been holed up with him the whole time, so I don't know when she would have been hungry. But he says he's wanted to increase the rations in the Bajoran sector, but the Resistance makes it impossible to show any kindness to her people.
Yeah.
So, now let's blame them for that.
He sees them like children and only wants what's best for them.
Yeah, he says he really wants to help the Bajorans. He thinks of them as his children. Oh my God.
Yes.
She asks if he still feels that way after some of his children tried to kill him. He says bad manners are the fault of the parent, not the child, which is, that's true.
Kind of true.
He turns and is looking out the window and he says, my weakness is I'm too generous, too forgiving. My heart is too big.
Oh, he starts monologuing. It's total Dukat.
And then Dax clubs him on the back of the neck, knocking him out and says, so is your ego. You go, Dax.
Nice. Yes, I thought that was a very good move.
He's horrible.
We're seeing so much of the real Dukat here.
Yeah. Well, back in their cell, Garak is prattling on about a potential cover story, and Sisko is questioning Odo about Thrax, but Odo keeps claiming ignorance. And then Dax breaks through the back wall of the cell and says, miss me? And Sisko is very happy to see her.
Yeah, and she's like blowing out the fire around the hole she's burned.
That was great.
It was a very funny scene.
She is a person of action. I really like her.
And Avery just gives this huge grin when he sees her. I was like, that was a very well put together scene.
Yes. Like the whole time you're all terrified for her. Meanwhile, she's the one who gets you out. Yeah.
Knocks out Dukat and blows a hole in the cell.
Love it. Yeah, I really like that. Well, now they're sneaking through the hallways heading to Docking Bay 3, where they'll find Dukat's personal shuttle. But a couple of Cardassians appear. One shoots Dax, and the others get into fistfights. Odo is losing his fight when Garak shoots the other guy, because Odo's not used to being a human yet.
Yep.
Sisko gets the upper hand on Red, but suddenly Red kind of shakes his head, turns into a shapeshifter, and heads up into the ceiling, shocking everyone.
Yes, that was quite surprising.
They look at each other, but then they help Dax up and they head off to Dukat's shuttle. But when they enter the airlock, they end up back in the cell where they started, and the hole in the wall is now gone. So things are not exactly what they seem.
Yeah.
And a very creepy spoonhead comes up to the cell to say their execution has been scheduled for 2 hours from now.
Ah, so you're now using that phrase. You're almost Mars O'Brien.
I'll probably forget it after this episode.
Cardies. So I have to ask, at this point in the episode, did you think this was another one of those, it's the founders messing with their heads?
I did think that. I actually thought that, I think even earlier, that maybe the founders were messing with them because it was similar to how that happened in those episodes, right? Where their bodies were in one place, but their minds were somewhere else. So I did think that. Do you remember, is that what you thought at the time when you first saw it?
I don't remember at the time what I thought.
Well, Sisko does not understand how there can be a shapeshifter here when the founders didn't know about the wormhole at this point in time. Sisko tells Odo he's been acting strangely since they got here. He's like, everything seems to lead back to you. And then Red appears, the guy who, by the way, a minute ago was a shapeshifter and went up into the ceiling. And he says to Odo, you wanted to see me? Odo's like, yes, it's an emergency. So off they go to the security office for a chat. And Odo says, you're about to make a very big mistake and I can prove it. And he gives Red all the ways to investigate this crime. But Red says it's not his job to prove guilt. Odo says it's his job to find the truth, but Red is really done investigating.
Yeah.
He says it's all the Bajorans' fault anyway. If they would stop fighting the occupation, none of this would be happening. They keep arguing, and Red is like, the Bajorans are fighting against order and the rule of law. And Odo says there's more to life than the rule of law. Red says only the guilty make statements like that. So he tries another tactic. Odo says, we're not terrorists. There's been a temporal displacement of some kind. We're from the future. And Red says, I know. And Odo asks what he's going to do about it. And Red says, the question is, what are you going to do, Odo? Dun, dun, dun.
Yes.
Uh-oh. Well, then we jump to the execution. And Garak, Dax, and Sisko are about to be executed. Dukat is here now saying that this is what happens when you take up arms against those that try to protect you.
Interesting definition of protection.
Right. Odo kind of freaks out and says this is not what happened, and he knocks the gun out of the executioner's hand, and he tells Red, you don't even belong here. I do. And at that moment, everyone flashes into their normal clothes, and they see the actual execution happening behind them. Only Red isn't there. Odo is the one standing there in a Cardassian-like outfit or uniform.
Was it? I thought it was his normal brown uniform.
Nope.
Oh.
No, because it was kind of off of his neck. It was very different, very distinct.
Odo looks a lot skinnier in the past.
They didn't have as much food on the station. Oh, wait, no, he didn't eat then. He eats now.
Yeah.
Maybe he's put on some weight.
What's all the drinking?
Oh, yeah, the bubbly beer. After the executions, everyone else disappears, just leaving our crew. And Odo says that's exactly how it happened 7 years ago. He admits it happened while he was chief of security, not Thrax, or Red. He was the one who charged the men with a crime they didn't commit. 3 days later, there was another bombing on the promenade. Those 3 were innocent. All the evidence was there from the beginning, but I was too busy with maintaining order and the rule of law. I thought of myself as the outsider, the shapeshifter, who only cared about justice. It never occurred to me I would fail. But I did, and I never wanted anyone to know the truth that 7 years ago I allowed 3 innocent men to die. And then they all disappear, and they wake up back on the station. And Odo looks really shaken.
Yes, he did not look like he had a good experience.
No. Well, we go to the security office, and Dr. Bashir says that it seems like the 4 of them were locked into a version of the Great Link. Bashir ran a neurochemical scan of Odo's brain and found residual traces of morphogenic enzymes.
So we learn Odo is not as much of a solid as we thought he is.
Yeah, apparently not 100%.
Yeah.
He's still got a little shapeshifter going on in there, in his ET-shaped brain. Well, anyway, the plasma storm activated those enzymes and initiated a telepathic response. His mind reached out looking for other changelings, but all it found was Garak, Sisko, and Dax. And he says that right before the accident, he was thinking about the execution, so that's obviously why that's the memory that it went to.
That's really interesting that he can now, link with the others.
Somehow being in the link must have forced him to relive that moment and admit the truth. And Bashir is like, this would make a fascinating paper. And when Odo gives him a dirty look, he's like, well, I'm not going to write one.
Once again, Julian, know the audience. Read the room.
I mean, I think he's right. That would make a fascinating paper.
Very interesting, but
yeah. This is not the moment to bring that up.
Yeah. Especially with Odo, who's so very private.
Right.
And this is something so disturbing to him.
Right. Well, in comes Kira, and Bashir leaves. She looks very disappointed in Odo. She read his report and doesn't know what to think. And Odo says he's guilty. There's nothing else to say. Kira says, I believed in you. A lot of people did. You were special. The one man who stood apart from everything else. The one man who stood for justice. He says, well, now I'm just an imperfect solid. She's like, anyone who lived through the occupation had to get a little dirty. But she says, I need to know that no other innocent people died on your watch. But he's not sure. He just hopes not. The end.
Wow.
Yikes.
Exactly.
I felt like that was a little harsh on her part. I mean, you can't hold him up to a standard that you can't hold yourself up to.
I know. That's exactly where I was with this. Wait a minute, Kira. You came onto the station, killed a guy, lied to Odo, got away with it, and then years later, never told Odo. He figured it out. And you're criticizing him for this?
Oh, yeah. That's all in my notes, too. So we had the same exact thoughts.
Yeah. And even Kira has said she did things during the occupation she wasn't proud of. That she felt guilty about. So it's like, really?
But I guess if you have a hero, you do put them on a pedestal. And I think she, we've talked about how she's not aware of Odo's feelings. I mean, she should be now because he's human. But before he was human, we talked about how she didn't really identify with the fact that he had feelings, and she could on occasion be quite insensitive, at least in that one terrible episode that you didn't like.
Well, I think all of them were fairly insensitive. None of them really realized.
Like Sisko still calls him Constable, a thing he said in the first episode that he doesn't like. So I guess if she's looking at it that way, that he wasn't human then, right? That he was above that. Then when he got knocked off of that false pedestal, it was probably going to be a bit of a shock for her. But I would think that after a couple of days, she would have come to realize, well, gosh, that was my impression of him.
Yeah.
I have to come to terms with the fact that I had hero worshipped him into something else, but he's still just a fallible being.
And there's another side to it as well. He was working for the Cardassians. At the end of the day, freedom fighters like Kira would have been handed over by Odo to the Cardassians for torture and murder. He wouldn't be able to get away with it. He wouldn't be able to avoid doing that.
There was going to have to be some casualties in order for him to serve the greater good. Absolutely.
But at the end of the day, he's still also serving the Cardassian interests.
He is, yeah.
Bajorans killing Cardassians from a Cardassian point of view is a heinous crime. For a Bajoran point of view, they are fighting for the freedom of their planet.
Good point.
Odo, at the end of the day, whether Kira likes it or anybody likes it or not, is a tool of the occupiers.
Yeah.
And even though he pretends to say, oh, I was just bringing justice and order, he's still killing Bajorans.
I don't think he was pretending, or
maybe that's too harsh. He's still getting Bajorans killed by handing them over to the Cardassians.
Yeah.
For his sense of justice. I think if you were a Bajoran, I don't think you would look very fondly on Odo because he was serving the Cardassian interests.
He still was, yeah. I guess maybe they'd built him up in a different way because they could go to him with the truth. Over time, he seemed to become a true investigator, and he would try to get to the truth of what had happened.
Right.
And maybe this is the incident that kicked that off.
That's true. I can't remember which episode somebody mentioned in the past about the typical Cardassian way is you just grab half a dozen people randomly and shoot them.
The cleansing.
It wouldn't matter if they were innocent or guilty.
Right. Yeah.
And Odo brought, I'll find the people who really did it.
Yeah.
It's still pretty tough. He still looks like a collaborator.
Well, we talked about this so many times that Odo is serving a sense of justice in his head.
His
not
code,
a
yeah.
sense of justice. Yeah, his own sense, not anybody else's, like the rule of law or whatever. So it's almost like this is what really ties him to the founders, because they were all about chaos and trying to bring order to chaos. And that's really what he was doing. When he says he was trying to keep the law, what he was doing was just trying to get everybody to follow the rules so there wouldn't be any problems. Well, that's bringing order to chaos.
Very founder.
So to me, this was his link to the founders.
Agreed.
And maybe it was creating quite an existential crisis once he heard that come out of the mouth of the lady founder. That's like, oh man, that may have led him to thinking about this. And it was probably quite confusing. But I don't know that he was trying to do what the Cardassians wanted more than he was trying to do what the Bajorans would have wanted. He was trying to play it in the middle. But you're right. He worked for the Cardassians. And if he hadn't been able to do enough of what they wanted, they would have kicked him off the station or killed him or whatever. And they would have gone back to Red.
Right. Agreed.
We started in your overanalysis without me asking if you had any overanalysis. Do you have?
Apparently we have, yes.
That's my bad.
I'm sure the listeners are keeping up.
Yeah.
The next thing I want to talk about here is, and this is, again, Odo. Did he just do a bad investigation? Or did he deliberately not look at evidence? That's the other side of, I don't know if Odo's really guilty. He did an investigation with the evidence that he thought he had at the time, which was wrong. If you come back later and go, oh, well, there was this that I missed, as he gained more experience, is that really guilty if he didn't have all the facts because he didn't necessarily know how to do it at the time or didn't have access to them?
It's not a bad way to look at it, that now you're looking back on something where you could have done it better because you know how to do it.
Yeah.
But you were just working with the tools that you had at the time.
Exactly. And we saw when Odo in Unnecessary Evil.
Necessary Evil.
We saw in that episode that he did seem a little deferential to the Cardassian troops.
Sure.
And Dukat. Would he have been in a position of confidence at that point to be able to question the Cardassian troops and say, oh, so he was strangling him. How come nobody else said they saw this Bajoran strangling Dukat? That would require a certain amount of, if you like, confidence in Odo's superiors, that allowing him to question the troops.
I do think he's giving himself quite a hard time about his lack of investigation in this episode. He's yelling at Red, but he's really yelling at himself about it.
Oh, yeah.
And could he have thought of all those things at the time? Probably not. But even one or two of them might have turned it around.
Yeah.
But he makes a point of saying that he didn't have time for that because he was just trying to bring order. I think he could have done a better job, but he took the evidence handed to him and used that as the answer, which it isn't enough. You could also say that as a shapeshifter, he maybe wasn't feeling the same level of guilt once he turned into the humanoid, and the guilt became a bigger emotion than he's used to.
That's a good point.
And he may have started investigating some of those feelings about it, especially at that conference.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I guess this is the deliberate part of the story. You don't know whether this is he did a bad investigation or whether this is hindsight of him looking back and going, I did a really bad investigation. Right. I guess it makes it more interesting if it doesn't spell out exactly what it is. You could go either way of going, he did a sloppy job then and he knows it. Or the Odo of today with all this experience and all this understanding looking back at it and going, wow, I did a bad job.
Yeah.
So I guess that's up in the air. I'm not ready to condemn him.
Okay.
The other thing is interesting is the behavior of Dukat in this. And this is another question for Odo. So the way Dukat's behaving in this episode is from Odo's memories of Dukat. So he must have absolutely known about how Dukat behaves. Has he not briefed anyone, told Kira, written a report, anything about Dukat was kind of a predator?
I mean, I hate to tell you this, but that is the pattern on this show. We don't help women when we should. Men have to help.
Even from a strategic standpoint, just writing a report to tell the Federation about what one of the most...
It's criminal. it's horrible. We shouldn't allow him on the station because of it. I mean, come on, people.
Or is this typical behavior for a Cardassian in command?
I don't know. I don't like it. I think you know what's in my Women in the Future section.
I would be very interested to hear. So what else can we talk about this episode? There's some hints that there might be something more to Odo.
That's true. In my overanalysis, I wrote, this thing with the telepathic link is awfully hand-wavy.
That's the bit you're going to say is hand-waving?
Well, yeah. Well, it's telepathic, the Great Link, and not physical, because what I thought we had established is they had to merge, or he had to go into the Goo Lake to be a part of the Great Link, but somehow they're able to do it without even touching, because they weren't touching on the shuttle. They were all separated. So now we learn that they can just do it telepathically. I don't know how to feel about that.
Only when the episode requires it.
Yeah, because they also had that thing where telepathy didn't work on him. And
okay, there's a get out clause here.
Okay.
One, he's human, so now maybe the telepathy works.
Changed everything.
Yep.
Oh.
Or a humanoid. And two,
okay,
it was some kind of plasma field.
Yeah, it was definitely some kind of plasma something.
The greatest get out clause in all of Star Trek. Some kind of. And that is what triggered it.
Well, I guess a couple things. Yes, this is interesting because he's not completely a solid or completely a human, because there's something different.
Yeah.
I was a little confused about how, if they're all in this mini Great Link together, why are they having separate experiences? Why did Dax break away and have a separate experience that Odo did not have in his memory?
Yeah.
That, to me, didn't quite make sense.
Yeah, that's a good point.
They all should have been together all the time.
Because perhaps it's an imperfect link.
Okay.
It's some kind of imperfect link.
It's some kind of something or other that makes it not perfect. Yeah.
That's interesting, because you would wonder then of why don't all of them see it through Odo's eyes, the entire experience.
Exactly. Yeah. How would he know about anything else outside of what he could see?
I like that. Mind you, it could also be the fact that, remember, Odo has an additional 7 years of experience from that point. So this memory is an amalgam of things that happened on the station.
Maybe he spent time in Dukat's office as a chair or something and he witnessed it. Like maybe he would go in there to make sure he wasn't really attacking the women.
Interesting.
There you go. There's a headcanon.
Anytime you bring in a rolling tray, you've got to be checking it for Odo.
That's true. He was probably the tray that the Kanar was sitting on.
Yep. And tables, that's the other one.
Or paintings.
Yep. Well, I don't think I have any further overanalysis.
I think my last thing, I had a bunch of things in here, but we talked about all of them. But
yeah,
I'm just wondering, are we supposed to think that this event that happened, so when he witnessed that execution, that was a turning point for when he started trying to get to the truth and become a better investigator? Because he said there was that explosion that sort of proved that they were innocent.
Yeah.
Do you think that was a turning point that turned him into what he is now?
Time for some headcanon.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of headcanon so far in this conversation, so why not some more?
I think this was the incident that changed Odo from being a founder to what he's become. Because the founders are obsessed with order and just following their rules. The order from chaos. And this had such an impact on Odo that being wrong, seeing that there's more, he used the words, there's more to just the law and following the rules.
He did, yeah.
This is one of the incidents, probably maybe it's the incident that changed Odo's way of thinking, an entire view. And this is one of the things that led him on that path where he's a divergence from the founder mindset.
Okay.
It's his evolution.
Yeah, okay. Well, fair enough. I think it's always good to get those important moments in time when people start looking at things differently, at least your fictional characters. Well, should I go to Women in the Future?
I think you should.
I don't have a lot, but I did think Kira was unreasonably harsh on Odo at the end. I mean, she did stuff she wasn't proud of during the occupation, so why not believe that Odo did too? I guess maybe because he would bring it up, or maybe he would be holier than thou in situations, and so she believed the hype as well.
To go back to a point you made earlier, and a note you pointed out on the shuttle, there's a little bit of hero worship for Odo.
Yeah, I guess.
There's that pedestal thing. Odo's been seen as above all of this, even if it's unrealistic. And the legend is born, as Sisko said.
Right.
So what you're seeing is, if you like, a fall of a hero or a fall of an icon.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to have had more of this conversation. It was very brief between Odo and Kira, but I guess we don't get a lot of Nana Visitor at this time.
Yeah.
So they just did kind of a short thing. It was probably totally even filmed out of sequence. But I would have liked to have more of this conversation.
Yeah. Agreed.
Well, then the stuff with Dukat bringing in young Bajoran women that he can control is an absolutely disgusting power dynamic that's, for me, very hard to watch. I'm not saying I don't believe it happened. I do believe that kind of stuff happens, and I find it horrifying. I'm just not sure I want to see it in Star Trek.
Yeah.
But it was great that Dax once again proved herself to be more than capable of getting herself out of trouble. But, realistically, this is not a situation that she would have gotten out of unscathed. That's just not what would have happened in the real world, which is awful to say. But I like to see her get herself out of scrapes and to be the smart one. And the one thing I really like about her is she's such an idea person, right? Like, she's just throwing out ideas all the time. And I always like that about her. And she will quite frequently settle into the right answer. I just thought she was really good in this episode, even in the face of this crap that her character had to go through.
Yeah.
So let's go to rating. Thumbs up, thumbs down, or neutral. What is your rating?
Okay, my rating on this one is fairly complex.
Oh.
Because I felt it embraced some of the elements of Necessary Evil, which was such a great episode. I liked the whole part of Odo having to deal with events from his past. That I thought was great. I felt disappointed at the end for the exact reason you brought up. You would have liked that conversation with Kira to have gone on longer. I would like to have seen more there. I would like to have seen more of a resolution.
Right.
It seemed like very quick.
Yeah, agreed.
Everything else in the episode I liked. I even thought it was interesting the way they showed what Dukat was really like, which they've sort of hinted at.
Yeah.
It went to show the depths of depravity of this character.
Yeah, the kind of disgusting worship of this character on Twitter, I find really upsetting, especially after this episode.
Yeah. And also, it shows the evolution of Odo into what he becomes later.
Right.
Which is important. So, overall, I'm giving it a thumbs up. But that end element is the one bit of I wanted a better payoff, but I'm still giving it a thumbs up.
Yeah, I agree. I wanted a better payoff, and there should have been a much better scene there. If Odo were actually a person who recorded logs, he could have had a very dramatic log at the end where he talked about that and his growth from it. Something interesting could have been done there and wasn't. It was a lost opportunity. And I agree, it felt like a bit of a contradiction with Necessary Evil in places, because from the beginning, Odo was showing that he wasn't going to be pushed around by Dukat. But then he kind of claims here, well, it was Dal Dukat's fault. So I did feel that inconsistency between those two episodes. I think if we'd never seen that other episode, this one is an easier thumbs up than it is.
Right.
But I can't deny this is a good episode. There are many good things in it. There's very good acting in it. And it's hard not to like any episode that has Garak in it.
Yes.
So I'll still give it a thumbs up. I need this to mean something in Garak's development. I need him to have learned something from this. I wish we'd had that conversation at the end. This is one of those, I almost wish it was a two-parter so that we could talk more about what this means to the characters, but instead it's probably lost in episodic TV.
I felt Garak sort of trailed off at the end. They used Garak up to a point, and then it was almost like, did he have something else going on for the day?
I wonder if it was cut. Yeah, it was like clip, clip, clip. Yeah. No, I hear you.
Okay, something I just thought of about Kira.
Yeah.
She talked about how there were things that she did in the Resistance that she wasn't proud of.
Right.
She must have ended up causing civilian casualties by accident, a bomb going off too early, any number of reasons that she personally could have killed completely innocent civilians. So perhaps the problem is she looks at Odo as someone who didn't make mistakes, that never got civilians killed. Has this view of him of he was above that, even down to the fact that so Odo caught terrorists or identified terrorists who caused bombings or attempted to kill, Dukat, whatever. Those terrorists, freedom fighters, knew what they were doing going into that and that there was a risk they would get caught. So if you're like, she or the Bajorans are justifying it as Odo was only doing his job. He wasn't randomly picking people and having them executed. Is that a stretch?
You know how frequently this show likes to do something in the beginning and then bring it back at the end? And maybe lots of shows do that, but
yeah,
we analyze this show so much, I notice it here. In the opening scene, Garak talked about how the Bajorans care more about myths and legends than they care about debating the philosophies of the occupation.
Yeah.
And so I don't think he's wrong. If you think about the way they talked about how Odo has a fan base, he was obviously on some panel that was moderated by somebody who described him, in this way that made Sisko say he's a legend. So they're bringing that almost like all the way around to the end of the episode and saying, here's an example. They're more focused on the myth and the legend of Odo than on the reality. Because when faced with reality, Kira was like, oh, say it isn't so.
Yeah.
Instead of her just going, this had to be this way.
Right. That's interesting. So, in a little defense of Garak, I guess the Bajorans are just going to paper over the fact that the Cardassians helped them get rid of the Dajaras and their completely rigid society.
Like I said, this is an example of something that maybe in 100 years they can look back on it and have an objective debate.
Yeah.
But today, that's not going to happen.
It's going to be pretty difficult to be dispassionate talking about an occupation like that so close.
Not going to happen. Yeah.
Especially as Kai Wynn wants the Dajaras back, really, at the end of the day.
Oh, man. Where is Kai Wynn? We haven't seen her in ages.
She's on Bajor murdering Bajorans somehow.
Oh, Lord.
Probably pushing clerics off high buildings.
So this wraps up Season 5, Episode 8. Come back next week, but not for Episode 9. Next week, we are going to do a special episode where we talk about Star Trek First Contact, because in the normal human timeline of Earth, that movie was released between this episode and the next episode of Deep Space Nine. So this, in that timeline, is when James would have watched the movie, and it's his favorite movie.
Oh, absolutely. For me personally, this is my favorite Star Trek movie of all of them. I think I saw it half a dozen times at the theaters. It really just clicked with me.
Yep.
So with that, I will encourage everyone before the next episode to watch Star Trek First Contact.
And then listen to this podcast.
And I promise I will not gush over every scene.
Yeah, we're not going to walk through every scene in quite the amount of detail that we have been doing with these episodes, if for no other reason than it is much longer than a 46-minute episode. So, but we will be watching it together and taking notes and talking about it in the next episode. And then we will come back the following week with Season 5, Episode 9. So in the meantime, if you'd like to tell us your own overanalysis of this or any episode, or if you just want to say something nice, you can email us at rebingeit@gmail.com, or you can tweet us at rebingeit. We're also on Instagram and YouTube at rebingeit. You can check us out on talkthroughmedia.com, where you can leave feedback for individual episodes, and you can also listen to the other Star Trek podcasts on our network.
Thanks for joining us on the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast.
That's it for me.
And that's it from me.